The empty road. Paragraph 1. It was late September, the air brittle with the first bite of autumn, when Hayter found himself driving down a rural highway that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. His shift at work had ended much later than expected, and he had chosen the shortcut, a poorly maintained road that wound through empty fields and abandoned farmhouses. The kind of road people whispered about in town, saying it had a reputation for strange things after dark. Hayter didn't believe in such nonsense. He was practical, rational, the type of man who needed evidence before accepting anything supernatural. Yet as the headlights cut through the blackness, illuminating nothing but cracked asphalt and skeletal trees, he felt a heaviness creep into his chest. Paragraph 2. The silence inside his car was oppressive, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of loose tools in the trunk. He reached for the radio, eager for some distraction, but every station produced only static, like whispers he couldn't quite make out. He frowned, twisting the dial harder, but nothing came through. That's when he realized something even stranger. There were no stars in the sky, not even the faint glow of the moon. The world outside his windshield looked swallowed whole by an endless void, as though the road were suspended in nothingness. He shook his head, muttering to himself, trying to rationalize, maybe fog, maybe cloud cover, but unease gnawed at him. Paragraph 3. After nearly 30 minutes of driving, Hayter noticed something odd in the distance, a pale shape on the side of the road. At first, he thought it was just a reflective sign, the kind warning of sharp turns or roadwork ahead. But as his headlights neared, the figure sharpened into something unmistakably human. A woman stood alone, barefoot, wearing a thin white dress that fluttered slightly in the cold wind. She didn't raise her arm to hitchhike, nor did she move aside. She simply stared at the oncoming car with a stillness so unnatural it made Hayter's knuckles tighten around the wheel. Every instinct told him not to stop, but slowing down felt inevitable, as though unseen hands were pressing against his brakes. Paragraph 4. The car rolled to a hesitant stop beside her. Hayter cracked the passenger side window, just enough to speak. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flicked from the headlights to him, and then to the dark fields beyond the road. Her eyes were glassy, almost lifeless, but her lips finally parted. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice brittle like wind sweeping through dry leaves. Before he could ask what she meant, her body stiffened, and she suddenly stepped back, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of his headlights. Hayter leaned forward, searching, but it was as if the earth itself had swallowed her. Paragraph 5. Uneasy, Hayter pressed his foot on the gas, eager to leave the encounter behind. Yet as his car lurched forward, his rearview mirror betrayed him. There she was again, sitting silently in the back seat, her pale face illuminated faintly by the dashboard glow. His breath caught in his throat, his hands trembling on the wheel. The woman didn't move, didn't blink, just stared straight ahead with an expression of infinite sorrow. Hayter's mind raced between panic and disbelief. The empty road stretched endlessly ahead, but it no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a trap, and he was already too deep inside it. The passenger Hayter's throat tightened as he forced himself not to glance at the rearview mirror again. Every instinct screamed at him to slam the brakes and leap out of the car, but the very thought of turning around to face the figure in his back seat felt unbearable. His hands clutched the steering wheel so hard his knuckles blanched, veins standing out on his skin. The air inside the car had turned icy, his breath now visible in faint, shaky clouds. He tried to convince himself that it was a hallucination, fatigue playing tricks on his senses, but deep down, he knew the chill in the air wasn't coming from him. His voice cracked when he finally forced himself to speak. "Who are you?" The silence that followed was suffocating, almost mocking, before the woman shifted slightly. Her movement was so slow and deliberate it made the hair rise on his arms. She leaned forward just enough that he could see her pale eyes reflected in the side mirror. Her lips parted, but instead of words, a faint sound escaped, a hollow sigh, like wind funneled through a cavern. It carried a weight that pressed against his ears, drowning out the engine and filling the car with an unnatural hum. Hayter's pulse hammered against his temples as he pressed harder on the gas, the car now racing along the cracked road. Yet no matter how fast he drove, the highway remained unchanged. No intersections, no houses, not even a distant glow of civilization. Panic surged in waves, sweat dripping down his temples despite the cold. He flicked his eyes to the odometer. He had been driving for nearly an hour, yet the fuel gauge hadn't dropped. The world outside seemed stuck in a loop, the same skeletal trees, the same endless void pressing against his windows. Suddenly, the woman's whisper cut through the oppressive silence. "Do you remember me?" The question sent a jolt of terror through him. Her voice wasn't fragile anymore. It was layered, as if multiple people were speaking at once, echoing inside his skull. Hader shook his head violently, stammering, "No, I don't know you." But his denial only seemed to thicken the air, making it harder to breathe. The rearview mirror trembled slightly, not from the car, but as if her reflection was vibrating on its own, distorting, unraveling. Then came the breaking point. The woman lifted her hand slowly, her fingers unnaturally long in the dim light, and pressed them against the back of Hader's seat. The pressure was cold, heavy, forcing him forward as though an invisible weight was crushing him into the wheel. His chest constricted as he fought to keep the car steady, his breaths turning ragged, desperate. For the first time since the drive began, Hader's rational mind cracked. He screamed, not in defiance, but in raw, animal terror. And the moment the scream left his throat, the headlights caught something new ahead, a broken wooden sign, weather-worn and nearly swallowed by weeds. The word carved into it was faint but legible, and it sent a chill through him so deep he almost lost control of the C. It read, "Welcome back." "Welcome back." The sign seemed to glow unnaturally in the beams of the headlights, as though the words themselves had been waiting for him. Hader's stomach twisted while rising in his throat. "Welcome back," he whispered aloud, his voice trembling. Back to where? He had never been here before. At least, that's what his mind insisted. Yet a faint tug of familiarity gnawed at him, a sensation buried deep beneath years of forgotten memory. He tore his eyes away from the sign, but the woman's voice coiled around his thoughts again, soft but relentless. "You left once. You don't leave twice." Hader slammed his foot against the gas pedal, the car roaring forward as if sheer speed could carry him out of the nightmare. The sign disappeared behind him, swallowed by darkness, but the weight in the back seat only grew heavier. His skin prickled as if invisible hands brushed against his neck, his shoulders, testing his resolve. He refused to look back. Every fiber of his being screamed that if he made eye contact again, something irreversible would happen. But then the landscape began to betray him. Through the windshield, the cracked highway bent unnaturally, twisting in directions no road ever should. The skeletal trees leaned inward, their branches forming distorted shapes, some resembling arms, others faces frozen mid-scream. The car shook violently as though the asphalt beneath it were alive, pulling, resisting him. Hader gritted his teeth and fought the wheel, sweat pouring down his face despite the Arctic chill in the car. His headlights flickered once, twice, then went black. For a fraction of a second, he was swallowed whole by absolute void. No road, no sky, no sound but his own panicked heartbeat. Then, with a sickening lurch, the lights flared back to life. He slammed the brakes. His car was no longer on the highway. It sat idling in front of a dilapidated farmhouse, its windows gaping like hollow eyes, its roof sagging under years of decay that he stared in disbelief. He had never turned off the road. He had never slowed down. And yet here he was, parked at a place that felt both unfamiliar and achingly recognizable. His trembling hands rested on the steering wheel, unwilling to move, until the woman finally broke the silence again. This time, her whisper came from the passenger seat. "Home." Hader's heart lurched as his eyes darted sideways. The seat beside him was empty, but the indentation of a body pressed deep into the fabric, as though someone unseen sat there, breathing steadily. The house loomed before him, its rotting door swaying slightly despite the still air. Every rational thought told him to drive, slam the accelerator, and never look back. Yet his body betrayed him. Without conscious decision, his hand reached for the keys, twisting them out of the ignition. The car died, and with it, the last fragile barrier of safety he clung to. Silence bled into his ears until it became deafening. His breath faltered. The woman's final words for the night slithered into his skull, wrapping around his mind like chains. Go inside. The house that wouldn't stay silent the night was calm, almost unnaturally so, when Nadia and her younger brother Saad moved into their grandmother's old house on the outskirts of town. Their grandmother had passed away just a month earlier, and their father insisted they stay there temporarily while renovations were being completed on their own home. The house was large, too large for just two young siblings, with long corridors, creaking staircases, and windows that stared into the woods beyond. On the first evening, Nadia stood by her bedroom window and noticed how the tree leaves shifted oddly in the breeze, though the air outside was perfectly still. She told herself it was just nerves. That night, Saad complained about noises in the walls. He described it as whispers, like when people tell secrets at school. Nadia scolded him for being dramatic, but she couldn't deny that the silence in the house seemed heavier than usual, like a blanket pressed against her chest. The electricity flickered once, dimming the hallway light, and for a brief second, she thought she saw something dark moving at the end of the corridor. When she blinked, it was gone. She shook her head, reminding herself that her grandmother's house was just old. Pipes rattled, floors groaned, lights misbehaved. There was nothing unusual about it. On the second night, Nadia awoke to the distinct sound of footsteps moving slowly across the upstairs landing. She lay in bed frozen, listening, her breath caught in her throat. The steps paused directly outside her door. She wanted to convince herself it was Saad sneaking around, but she could hear him faintly snoring in the room next to hers. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling, but she didn't open it. She just listened. After a moment of unbearable stillness, the footsteps retreated down the hallway toward the staircase, each creak echoing louder than the last. Nadia pulled the blanket over her head and stayed awake until dawn. By the third day, she began to notice changes in the house itself. Doors that were left open would be found shut, chairs slightly pulled back from tables, and objects out of place. At first, she accused Saad of messing around, but his pale face and trembling denial convinced her otherwise. He admitted that every night, without fail, the whispers returned, clearer each time. "It's like they're talking about us," he whispered to her, clutching her arm. Nadia brushed it off, but inside her stomach twisted. She couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't empty when the two of them were alone. It was watching, waiting, feeding on their presence. On the fourth night, the whispers finally reached Nadia's ears. She had been drifting into uneasy sleep when she heard them, a chorus of hushed voices slipping through the walls. They weren't distinct words, not at first, but more like breaths dragging against her skin. Slowly, they grew louder, sharper, as though dozens of people were standing just outside her door, murmuring her name. "Nadia." The sound crawled into her mind and shook her awake. She bolted upright, drenched in sweat. The house was supposed to be silent, but instead, it hummed with unseen life. That was the first night she realized her grandmother's house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. The upstairs hater's body moved before his mind caught up, his foot landing on the first step of the staircase. The wood groaned beneath him, echoing like a scream muffled under heavy blankets. He gripped the banister with shaking hands, splinters biting into his skin, but even the sting felt distant, unreal. The air on the stairs was colder, thicker, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of rust and decay. Each step creaked as though it hadn't been touched in years, yet dust did not stir, no cobwebs clung to his clothes. It felt like the house had been carefully cleared for his arrival. The static whispers rose and fell around him, bleeding from the walls, the floor, even the railing beneath his fingertips. As he climbed, they grew more distinct, fragments of words straining to form. Don't leave again. The cadence wasn't random. It was familiar, like the rhythm of someone begging or pleading. A flicker of memory stabbed at him. Someone calling his name in a shrill, desperate tone, but the recollection slipped away before he could seize it. His breathing quickened, each inhale trembling in his chest, but his feet carried him higher. Halfway up, he froze. At the top of the stairs, illuminated by no light, but visible all the same, stood the woman. She was no longer at the roadside, no longer in his car. Her pale dress clung damply to her body, her long hair dripping as though she had just been pulled from water. Her face remained partially hidden in shadow, but her eyes burned faintly, dull and lifeless. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to fill the stairwell, pressing down on him like the weight of an ocean. But Hader's throat tightened as he whispered, "What do you want from me?" His voice cracked, barely audible, but the house seemed to carry the sound upward toward her. For a moment, silence swallowed everything, even the static. Then, in a voice softer than breath, she answered, "You were supposed to stay." The words struck him like a hammer, his knees buckling under their weight. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. All he could do was stare at the figure that claimed he had broken some forgotten promise. Then the sound of a door slamming upstairs shook the entire house. The woman's head turned sharply, unnaturally, toward the noise. Her body jerked once, like a puppet tugged by strings, before she stepped backward into the darkness of the upper hallway, vanishing completely. Hader remained frozen on the staircase, torn between the urge to flee and the impossible pull to follow her deeper into the house. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. It was the silence of expectation. The house wanted him to choose. The corridor of echoes, the air inside the corridor was cool and weightless, as though Alara had stepped into a dream within a dream. The path beneath her feet glowed faintly, made of soft light instead of stone or soil. Above, there was no ceiling, only a stretch of endless night sky scattered with stars she didn't recognize. Some shone brighter than any she had seen before, while others flickered faintly, as though they were whispering to one another across impossible distances. Every step she took echoed gently, though there was no floor to carry sound. The walls of the corridor were not solid. Instead, they shimmered like rippling glass, each surface reflecting fleeting images that shifted too quickly to hold on to. At first, Alara thought they were simple illusions, like reflections in water. But as she looked closer, she realized the images felt alive, glimpses of places and moments she had never seen, yet which stirred faint memories within her. A garden filled with silver flowers swayed in the reflection, vanishing into an ocean of light. Then, the image shifted to a lonely tower under a darkened moon, and finally to a hand reaching out, waiting for hers. Each vision slipped away before she could grasp it fully. Her footsteps carried her deeper, and the corridor grew more vibrant. The air began to hum again, the same soft vibration she had felt at the forest door, but now it carried voices within it, faint echoes, layered one over another. Some were low and steady, others light and distant, but together they wove a sound like the memory of music. Alara tilted her head, listening closely. Though she could not understand the words, she felt certain the voices were guiding her, offering reassurance that she was walking the path she was meant to. Ahead, the corridor began to bend, curving into a gentle spiral. The farther she walked, the more the stars above shifted, rearranging themselves into patterns she did not know but somehow recognized. Constellations flickered into shapes, a key, a river, a lantern, all symbols she had already seen along her journey. It was as if the sky itself was telling her story back to her, reminding her of every step she had taken. Alara touched her chest, where the warmth of the key still lingered against her heart, and felt her breath steadied. At the end of the spiral, the corridor widened. The shimmering walls grew still, no longer shifting, but opening into a vast archway of light. Beyond it lay a new world. She could sense it even without stepping through. The air ahead carried the scent of rain and stone, a fresh, grounding smell that was utterly different from the silver forest she had left behind. Alara stood at the edge of the archway, gazing into the faint glow that awaited her. She did not know what she would find there, but the corridor's echoes whispered one last time, soft and insistent, as though promising, "You are not alone." The rooms of the forgotten hater's body trembled as the woman at the far end of the hall stood motionless, her glassy eyes locked on him. The air grew heavier with every breath, the overlapping whispers rising until they became unbearable. He stumbled forward, desperate to escape her gaze, and ducked into the nearest open room. The moment he crossed the threshold, the voices shifted, quieter now, but closer, as though they were breathing directly against his ear. The room was small, the ceiling slanted, the wallpaper curling in damp ribbons. A broken crib sat in the center, its wood splintered and gnawed as if something had clawed at it from the inside. Hader's stomach tightened when he noticed the faint outline of a handprint smeared across the railing. Small, no larger than a child's, but stained dark as if painted with old blood. The air smelled sour, thick with mildew, but beneath it was something sharper, fresher, metallic. His pulse quickened, he backed toward the door, but it slammed shut with a violence that shook the walls. The crib creaked. Slowly, impossibly, it began to rock on its own. Each sway was deliberate, the sound of its wood scraping the floor louder and louder until it drowned out even the whispers. Hader pressed against the wall, panic tightening around his chest, and then he heard it, a wet, rattling breath coming from inside the crib. Something shifted within the shadows, and a shape rose, too small to be an adult but wrong in its proportions. The figure pulled itself upright, tiny hands gripping the railing. In the dim light, Hader saw a child's face, but it wasn't alive. Its skin was waxy, pale, its eyes glazed over like cloudy glass. The mouth stretched into a trembling smile, as though it was forcing its face into something human. "Daddy," it gurgled, the voice thick and broken, words bubbling through a throat filled with something viscous. Hader's knees nearly buckled as bile rose hot in his throat. He shook his head, stumbling toward the door, refusing to believe. "I don't have a child," he gasped, but the thing in the crib only giggled. A hollow, choking sound, the walls shuddered. The crib tipped violently, crashing onto its side, but the creature didn't fall. It scuttled toward him on all fours, its limbs bending unnaturally, joints snapping like brittle twigs. Its milky eyes rolled toward him as it hissed, "You left me here." Hader grabbed the doorknob, twisting desperately, and with a shattering crack, the door finally flung open. He stumbled back into the hallway, the voices roaring louder than ever. The doors along the corridor slammed shut in unison, leaving him no choice but to face the woman now standing closer than before, her pale hands outstretched as though welcoming him back into her grasp. The shifting walls, the slam of the nursery door echoed like a gunshot, vibrating through the floorboards beneath Hader's feet. The pale woman stood only a few steps away now, her soaked dress dripping onto the warped wood, leaving dark stains that spread like veins. Her arms hung open as though she was waiting for him to fall into them, but her face remained expressionless, her lifeless eyes unblinking. Hader staggered back, his spine pressing against the peeling wallpaper, but the hall seemed to breathe in around him, closing the space. The walls tightened, bending inward as if the house itself wanted to crush him into her. He lunged for one of the other doors, but the handles twisted away from his grasp like living things, the wood warping under his touch. The whispers returned, louder, now erupting from every surface, floorboards, ceiling, even the cracks in the wall. Words formed clearly now, hundreds of overlapping voices repeating in unison, "Stay, stay, stay." His vision blurred as the hallway stretched unnaturally long, the woman always standing the same distance away no matter how many frantic steps he took backward. Panic clawed at him, while burning the back of his throat. The ceiling cracked with a sharp snap, raining down splinters of wood. Above, the sound of something crawling spread across the beams, too fast, too heavy to be human. The house groaned, the timbers straining, and the floor under Hader's feet bulged upward, rippling like something enormous pressed against it from below. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall, but the wallpaper curled away under his palm, revealing not wood, but pale skin, cold, clammy, pulsing faintly. He recoiled, horrified, realizing the house wasn't just alive. It was her. The pale woman tilted her head, watching his horror with the faintest twitch of satisfaction. She whispered something he almost didn't hear, a single phrase that slid through the cacophony of voices like a blade. "There is no leaving." As her words fell, the hallway twisted violently. The floor collapsed behind him, revealing a black chasm that stretched endlessly downward. The air howled as the void sucked at him, dragging him toward the edge. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the warped floorboards to keep from being pulled in. Splinters tore his hands, blood dripping onto the wood, but the house drank it eagerly, the boards darkening beneath his fingers. When he dared to look up, she was right there, only an arm's length away now. Her outstretched hand hovered before his face, dripping with water that wasn't water at all. Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time her expression changed, her mouth curling into a smile too wide, too sharp. The void behind him roared like a storm, the air thick with its pull, and he realized he had no choice left. He either took her hand, or let the abyss take him. The truth beneath Hader's arms trembled as the pull of the abyss tore at him, dragging his body inch by inch toward the gaping blackness behind. His fingers bled freely now, slipping on the warped floorboards as he fought to hold on. The pale woman's hand hovered just before his face, steady, patient, unyielding. The roar of the void thundered in his ears, drowning out the whispers, until he thought his skull would split from the pressure. At the last moment, instinct overrode reason. With a strangled cry, he seized her hand. The instant their skin touched, the house stilled. The roar of the abyss died in an instant, leaving a silence so profound it was suffocating. Her hand was ice cold, her fingers impossibly long, curling around his with a grip that felt bone deep. For a heartbeat, he thought he had saved himself, pulled back from the brink. But then the floorboards beneath him dissolved into liquid shadow, swallowing his legs to the knees. His scream lodged in his throat as the pale woman leaned closer, her lifeless eyes burning into his. "Now you remember," she whispered, and her voice was no longer brittle. It was layered with grief, rage, and something hauntingly familiar. The world buckled around them, the house collapsing inward like a lung exhaling its final breath. The hallway, the doors, even the walls peeled away until there was nothing left but the two of them standing on the edge of an endless black sea. The horizon stretched infinitely, waves of ink lapping soundlessly against an invisible shore. The air reeked of salt and iron, filling Hader's lungs until he coughed. Memories began to bleed into his mind, unbidden and merciless. The farmhouse wasn't unfamiliar. He had been here before, years ago, as a boy. He saw himself running barefoot through its halls, hiding in the closet while thunder shook the windows. He saw the woman too, younger, her face warm, smiling, alive. She was his mother, but her smile soured into a scream, her hand clawing at the water as the river swallowed her whole. He had watched her drown, frozen in terror, doing nothing to save her. And afterward, he had run far from this house, far from this memory, never looking back. The pale woman's grip tightened, pulling him closer, her glassy eyes inches from his own. "You left me," she hissed, water dribbling from her lips, dripping down her chin like blood. "You promised you would never leave." Hader's chest convulsed with panic, the weight of guilt crushing him harder than the abyss itself. He tried to speak, tried to explain, but no words came. His lungs filled with cold, brackish water, choking him, drowning him in the truth he had buried. Around him, the black sea began to rise, waves climbing higher, ready to drag him under with her forever. The drowning silence, the black sea rose higher, swallowing the air around Hader with a suffocating hiss. The pale woman, his mother, yet not his mother, pulled him closer, her grip unrelenting. Her eyes bore into his, not with love, not with hatred, but with a bottomless hunger that demanded restitution. His lungs filled with brackish water though he hadn't yet gone under, each breath a drowning gasp. He fought, thrashing, clawing at her arm, but her strength was inhuman, rooted in the abyss itself. The waves lapped hungrily at his chest, his throat, his chin. In his final desperate act, Hader wrenched his gaze away from her and forced his eyes to the horizon. He remembered how, As a boy, he had stood at this very riverbank, the real one, not this warped echo, watching helplessly as she slipped beneath the current. He remembered the promise he had whispered into the storm, "I'll come back for you." And now, standing in the house that wasn't a house, on the shore that wasn't a shore, he realized he had, not to save her, but to be claimed by her grief. The truth struck like a knife. He hadn't escaped that night. He had only delayed the inevitable. The sea surged upward in a final wave, swallowing them both. Darkness engulfed him, cold water crushing his chest, searing his lungs. He screamed into the void, but only a stream of bubbles escaped, swallowed whole by the abyss. Through the blur, he saw her face dissolve, no longer a woman, no longer human, but a maw of endless black water pulling him down. His body convulsed, muscles straining, vision narrowing into nothing. And then, as suddenly as it began, there was silence. When Hader's eyes opened again, he was sitting in his car on the empty highway. The engine hummed quietly, headlights illuminating the same cracked asphalt stretching endlessly ahead. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, his clothes damp as though he had been dragged from a river. For a moment, hope surged. Had it been a nightmare? But then, in the rearview mirror, he saw her. Not the pale woman anymore, but his mother as she had been when alive. She smiled faintly, tender and sorrowful, before her face dissolved into water and vanished completely. Hader gripped the wheel with shaking hands, tears streaking his face. He pressed the gas, the car rolling forward into the endless dark. The road stretched ahead as it always had, but he knew now it would never end. The shortcut had become a loop, the house a waiting mouth, the sea a debt he could never repay. He wasn't driving home. He was already home, forever.